Hello everyone, I am back for the second time this week. I can't remember the last time I posted 2 videos in 1 week, but I'm doing it now. And we will be taking a look back at the 1991 Royal Rumble match and do a what if situation if a certain element of that particular match had actually come to fruition. So, if you're interested, continue watching this video, and if you want more, be sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below, and be sure to submit your questions for future Q&As. The email address is listed in the description down below. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the 1991 Royal Rumble event was a big one when I was a kid. Very historic, because that was the one where Sergeant Slaughter defeated the Ultimate Warrior to become the WWF champion, setting up the Hogan-Slaughter match at WrestleMania 7 after Hogan's Royal Rumble victory, even though this was before the Mania title shot stipulation. It was a big deal amongst kids because Randy Savage had cost Warrior the title, and felt like a really big deal because title changes, especially world title changes, didn't happen a lot on pay-per-view back then, and of course there were a lot fewer pay-per-views back then. And then in 1991, almost all of the pay-per-views that year featured a world title change. So I guess it was a sign that things were changing. But that was a much talked about event amongst all of the kid wrestling fans around at the time. I was 5 years old when that show first happened. I was going to turn 6 in a couple of months. And it was a really big deal. Now, the Royal Rumble match itself, it's not one of the more memorable or historic ones. This was before the WrestleMania title shot was on the line in the Rumble. At this point, the Royal Rumble was just a huge attraction and a fun way to get a bunch of people involved. Kind of like what Survivor Series was initially. It's a way to get stars that don't normally interact to interact with each other and build some stories and have some fun with having so many bodies involved in one match. Now, all of that changed in 1992 when the world title was put up for grabs in the Royal Rumble match itself. And then moving forward, they changed it to where the winner of the Rumble would get the title shot at WrestleMania. So the Royal Rumble would actually pick up steam in significance once, 92 and 93 took place. But prior to that, it was just kind of a fun attraction that they used to build the show around and do some fun things with the interactions and the build-ups for WrestleMania. And the 1991 Rumble kind of fit right in with that class, where it was used largely to continue and build stories for WrestleMania, get a few interesting character interactions. But again, not one of the more memorable ones, not one of the more historic ones, but a fun one to watch. As a pure example of the Royal Rumble concept in action, it was a fun one to watch, with both Valentine and Martel doing Marathon Man performances, and Martel finally getting eliminated, which got a huge pop from the crowd. That works really, really well. This particular Rumble actually had a lot of people last over 20 minutes. There were a lot of marathon men in this one, and that's another interesting aspect that makes this one stand out. It was also, I guess, the biggest historical aspects of this one were it was Hogan's second Rumble victory, which set the record, which was ultimately broken by Steve Austin in 2001, and tied by many others since. Shawn Michaels, Batista, who else has won 2 Rumbles? Triple H has won 2. I thought Roman had won 2, but I looked it up and he is not. So it's that's another discussion for another time. But Hogan set the record at this point for most Rumble victories with 2. So there's that historical goodie. This was also the first Royal Rumble to feature The Undertaker, who was a newcomer to the WWF at this point in time. And as far as I know, it's the only Rumble to feature the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal. So obviously, if they're involved in anything, it's going to make it a lot more exciting, because they are such colorful and badass characters that it's kind of surprising they weren't used in more Rumbles, but turns out they were only used the one time, at least as far as my memory works. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure 91 was the only time they were used in the Rumble. So there was some fun stuff in this Rumble, and like I said, it's a fun one to watch. It's just not one of the more grand or historic ones in the grand scheme of things. So then I got to thinking, well, what could have been done in this Rumble? Because again, the title shot wasn't up for grabs yet, even though the winner did end up going to WrestleMania and getting the title shot, Hulk Hogan, to face Sergeant Slaughter. What's something they could have done to make the 91 Rumble a little bit more significant? Well, Andre the Giant, and this has kind of been lost to time. I think more and more people are realizing it now, but Andre the Giant was, and I distinctly remember this, he was announced as a participant in the 1991 Royal Rumble. Now, he had not worked on pay-per-view, at least, and not on TV. I think he'd done some shows in between, but he had not been seen on camera as an active wrestler since WrestleMania 6, when he turned on Heenan, did his big walkout, had his big face turn. So he'd been gone. From a television perspective, he had been gone for quite a while. So him being in the Royal Rumble felt like a big deal because, like I said in my previous video, Andre the Giant carries a lot of weight. Even at that stage of his career where he'd kind of broken down, his name makes things feel more important and more special and can really elevate things. And, I remember listening to Bruce Pritchard in an interview that there were even talks that Andre was going to win the 1991 Royal Rumble because, again, no Mania title shot at this point, so you wouldn't have had to find a way to back out of, Andre getting the title shot or anything like that. And this could have been the last big victory of Andre's career had he actually gone in and won the 91 Royal Rumble. It would have gotten a huge pop for sure because Andre was beloved. And when he turned face at Mania 6, he got a standing ovation. Andre was one of those guys that even when he turned heel, the fans always wanted to cheer him. They were just waiting to be given permission to cheer him. Because, crowds back then, for the most part, were a lot more in line with what WWF wanted them to, say and do. They cheered the faces, booed the heels. For the most part, you had your occasional kind of split reactions, but they were a lot less common than they are now. And Andre was one of those guys that it felt like the audiences always wanted to cheer him. And once WrestleMania 6 happened, they got permission to cheer him again, and then he immediately became one of the most beloved wrestlers around, even though he'd been gone for a few months. I had a similar feeling towards The Undertaker, where as a kid, I was like, man, he's so cool. I wish they'd turn him face because I want to cheer for him because he's so cool. And then once he helped Randy Savage and Elizabeth and turned on Jake, I was like, okay, he's my favorite wrestler now. I ought to be a child again. It was so simple back then. But in any case, I think an Andre victory would have gone over very, very well. Much better than the Big John Studd victory in '89, which felt random and just a weird choice. Even without the Mania title shot. And no knock on Big John Studd. I have a lot of respect for him. It was just kind of like he'd been gone for a while, a few years at that point, and they turned him face, which Big John Studd works much better as a heel. And it was just an odd choice. And then he ended up not even wrestling at WrestleMania. It was just him as a special guest referee in the Jake and Andre match. And personally, I would have had DiBiase win the '89 Rumble, but that's just me. But '91, it's like, Andre, aside from Hogan, would be the biggest name in that match. And, the Giant winning the Royal Rumble would make a lot of sense and, add weight to the idea that Giants have an advantage in a Battle Royal type of situation. Because if you look at the Royal Rumble's history, they always talk about how the super heavyweights and the Giants have a distinct advantage. They very rarely win the Rumble. Yokozuna did. Big Show never won one. Khali never won one. Andre never won one. You're thinking of all these super heavyweights and they hardly ever win the Rumble. I think off the top of my head, I think Yokozuna is the only one that did. And unless you want to count Undertaker for his height, but I don't know if anybody considers Undertaker to be a true giant in the sense that Andre or Yoko or, Big Show would be a super heavyweight or something of that class. There aren't many. And this would have been a chance to kind of give Andre a huge, major last big win of his career and have him win the Royal Rumble. But even if they didn't want to do that and they were dead set on giving it to Hogan and doing the whole use the Rumble to set him up for Sergeant Slaughter at WrestleMania, okay, fine. But there's a couple of things that could have happened in this Rumble with Andre involved that I think would have been huge. And it kind of makes me go, man, I wish he'd been in it. And again, yes, Andre had declined at this point. But in a Royal Rumble, a match with 29 other people, you don't expect a whole lot out of him. You would just be happy to see him in this type of match. It's it's the basis for the nostalgia pop that we get now in Royal Rumbles where they just throw an old guy or a past talent out there. It's just there to get a pop and make for a feel-good moment. And I would if I had control over this match and Andre was available, I would have used him in a similar vein where it's he's there to kind of make people happy and do something special with him. So a couple of ideas that instantly spring out in my mind. Number one, this would be the first time that Andre and Hogan would be in the same match since their big feud. They were in the 90 and the 89 Rumble, but they weren't in the ring at the same time. And, I think their cage match at WrestleFest 88, or maybe SummerSlam 88, I don't remember which one came first, but those were probably the last time Hogan and Andre were in the ring together for any kind of like televised match or big thing. And, for such a big feud that helped put WrestleMania on the map and make WrestleMania what it was and shaped WrestleManias 3 and 4 and the enduring legacy of WrestleMania, that would have been huge to have like Hogan and Andre kind of come against each other once again in a big match like this, with this time with both of them as baby faces, and all of that history between them would have been interesting. Now, I would have used it as an opportunity to have Hogan and Andre have like kind of a reconciliation and work together against, like, Earthquake was in that match. You could have had like Hogan and Andre working against Earthquake or something like that, and that would have gotten a huge pop for sure. And that, as a kid, that would have been really gratifying to see, because Hogan got turned on so many times to the point that it became a running gag where like Orndorff turned on him, and Andre turned on him, and Savage turned on him, and Sid turned on. And by the time Sid turned on him, it was like, oh my god, really? Okay, maybe Hogan's the problem. It's like, because everybody keeps turning on him. And then in WCW, Jimmy Hart turned on him, Brother Brudai, Brutus Beefcake turned on him, and it just became like a running gag after a while. It's like Hogan has no friends; everybody just turns on him. But they hardly ever did like a reconciliation. I, off the top of my head, the only times I can think of like a reconciliation between Hogan and one of his big rivals, kind of with Orndorff, where they were on the Survivor Series team together in -- so you got it kind of, sort of, a little bit there. And Savage, when he came to WCW in '95. Other than that, like, it didn't really happen all that much. So it would have been really interesting if Hogan and Andre came face-to-face in the ring and then reconciled and then worked against some of the heels that were in that match. I think you could have made for a really fun moment there, and it would have gotten a huge pop. Again, as a kid, I would have popped huge for that if Hogan and Andre worked together one more time and kind of put the past behind them and became friends again. That would have really popped me for sure. And another thing that they could have done that would have been one for the history books would have been to have Andre interact with The Undertaker, because this would have been the only time that The Undertaker and Andre the Giant would have been in the same match together. And Undertaker's talked about this recently in his podcast, where, he mentioned that Andre had an idea for him to work with Taker, and he had an idea that was going to make a lot of money, and Andre took whatever that idea was to the grave with him. If I was going to speculate, I would probably think that Andre probably had the idea of doing a casket match. That would be, because it's such an obvious thing to do with Undertaker, and the casket match isn't exactly like, it's not like a Hell in a Cell or an Elimination Chamber. It's not the craziest idea in the world where you need to be like a certifiable madman to come up with it. I'm sure Andre looked at the Undertaker character, saw like the potential there, and was like, let's do a casket match. We'll get like this giant ass casket to throw Andre into to kind of make it believable that Andre could even fit inside the thing, and all the things they could have done with that. It would have been great, which they kind of did with Yokozuna with the double deep, double wide casket, and build some of that drama, of can Andre even fit inside that thing. That was, again, build up elements like that are so much fun and add so much to matches like this. It's again, I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure. I think that was Andre's idea, was to do a casket match, but again, who knows? But in any case, this could have been the one time that the Undertaker and Andre the Giant worked against each other in a match, because Undertaker, in a lot of ways, he was kind of the heir apparent to Andre. He became that larger than life attraction who didn't need a belt. He was an attraction all to himself. And, very different character, different presentation and everything, but similar role on the card, where it's like Andre was a main event all to himself. Like WrestleMania 1, the Slam match, WrestleMania 2, the NFL WWF Battle Royal. Those were huge attractions that you could build around Andre the Giant that didn't need to have a belt. It's just, oh my God, Andre's going to be working with a bunch of NFL players. Oh my God, Andre's in this match with his career on the line and $15,000 on the line. Who's going to slam who? And that was enough of an attraction because it's Andre. And Undertaker had a ton of those throughout his career. Some good, some bad, whatever. Undertaker versus Undertaker, whatever. But a lot of his stuff with Kane, the first Hell in a Cell match, things like that. A bunch of the casket matches. An attraction that you could sell as a main event without having to have a belt involved at all. So Undertaker very much was the heir apparent to Andre the Giant. It would have been great if you got that kind of ceremonial passing of the torch with Andre kind of anointing Undertaker as like the new guy. It would have been great if that happened. They just barely missed each other. Just barely. And I would have been thinking like, we did get that match between Undertaker and Snuka at WrestleMania where Taker pretty much destroyed him, and which was big for Taker at the time. It was further establishing him as this unstoppable force, and then he went on to work with Warrior, worked with Hogan, was WWF champion by the end of the year. So obviously it all worked out for Taker, but would have been awesome if they'd used the Rumble to have Andre and Undertaker interact with each other and then sets up a one-on-one match at WrestleMania. It's so much fun to think about. Again, Andre had really declined by that point, so I'm not saying it would have been the greatest match of all time or anything, but it's really fun to think about. Just the stare down of Undertaker and Andre staring down each other, I think would have been one for the history books and one for the highlight packages that would have, lived on forever. And, theoretically, Undertaker would win that match at WrestleMania on the big stage in Andre's final WrestleMania and get that big stamp of approval to ultimately help him, push him through to work with the Warriors and the Hogans of the world and then become a major star all his own. And again, it's not that Undertaker's career suffered in the long run. Undertaker obviously had a legendary career, did very well for himself, but it would have been really neat if that happened. It's kind of like, The Rock, big career, big name, did great for himself. He never had that WrestleMania where he held the belt up at the end of WrestleMania, which feels like a misfire. And, feels like that should have happened. But, it doesn't really matter because, The Rock is The Rock and he had a great career. And Undertaker, kind of the same thing. He had a great career, worked with a lot of great talents, had a lot of legendary feuds and matches. But man, if he had that thing with Andre, it would have been really, really cool and really gotten him off, really had the... really, strapped the rocket pack to him and sent him to the moon. He had worked with Andre the Giant at his first WrestleMania, and that's where the streak began. Like, that's where, that's a really fun one to think about. If the streak began with a victory over Andre the Giant, could you imagine that? Like, that's another one of those fun things to think about. But again, this is all pure, like, hindsight and, kind of this wishful thinking on my part. Again, Andre's health being what it was, the match itself wouldn't have turned out that great. I even have my doubts that he would have been able to take the bump. If he would have had to win the Rumble, because I don't think he could have taken the bump out of the ring at that point. Kind of like why Iron Sheik won the Gimmick Battle Royal at WrestleMania 17. So, but yeah, it is very, very fun to think about, though. And it's one of those things I'm like, man, the imagination is probably greater than what the reality would have been, but still, it's very fun to think about. But that's just something I wanted to talk about and do my little kind of preparation for the Royal Rumble. We've got the Rumble coming up, and that's always a big deal. Not going to do match predictions for the Rumble because, yeah. It's just, I don't feel like doing it, quite honestly. But we'll see the show and see how everything turns out. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.